Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Judy Noodleman, a member of the Wellness Committee. First, a few housekeeping items. One, our next wellness lecture is March 4th on the topic of our microbiome and gut health. Second, please silence and turn off your cell phones. And third, please hold your questions until the end when microphones will circulate throughout the room. So it's my pleasure to welcome Bill Schwartz back to Westminster for the second of his 2 lectures on sleep. Tonight's lecture will focus on sleep and aging. Bill is a neurologist and scientist and served as professor and associate chair for research and education in neurology at Dell Medical School. Though retired from this position, Bill continues to teach at UT Austin and develop our scientists and physicians of the future. Bill's own education included University of California, Irvine, and UC San Francisco, a research fellowship at National Institute of Mental Health, and then he completed his residency at University of California, San Francisco. Then Bill moved to the East Coast for appointments at Harvard and University of Massachusetts, and then moved to Austin in 2017. Bill has had fellowships and awards worldwide and is a leader in the field of sleep. And we are so lucky to have him here for a second time. Please join me in welcoming Bill to Westminster.
Thank you very much, Judy, and for the second invitation. Thanks for having me back. That's reassuring. So, you know, when Judy asked me to talk about sleep, I suggested, well, it's a big topic, obviously, and I suggested 2, maybe we could do 2 parts if people prepare it. One, you'll recall, was just to give some basic factual information, and I'm glad you had handouts with that, so that we'll be referring back to some of those things on this topic. And then the part 2 would be, you know, in terms of when sleep goes wrong, and there are obviously a lot of possibilities. But I thought for us, I'm including me, sleep and aging might be something that would be useful to talk about. So that's what we'll have here. We'll have plenty of time for questions on any topic as well. Doesn't have to remain on aging. So first is something that you're well aware of, and that is the prevalence of insomnia in older adults. So these are little simple graphs. I have my laser pointer here. So this, on the y-axis, is the prevalence of insomnia, and these are different age groups. 18 to 64, young people, 65 to 79, and then 64 to 80 plus. And you know, as we get older, the prevalence of insomnia gets greater. So this 44 really represents that, you know, nearly half the people in this group complained of some feature of insomnia. So we're all in good company, at least, that's true. We had mentioned last time, I think, about the fact that sleep is really pretty fragile. And we had seen some pictures. We had made the point that there are complex neural systems that put you to sleep and complex ones that keep you awake, and they're sort of interacting with each other. So there's a lot of fragility in that as we get older. The nervous system changes. So reflecting this fragility is this chart here, which is what if one adds medical problems, the number of medical problems. So what this chart shows here is these are individuals with no medical problems. Who's that? This would be one medical problem. Who is that? 2 or 3 or 4 or more medical problems. So as we get older, we collect chronic diseases, various medical problems, and of the insomniacs, those who said their problem was they're getting less than 6 hours of sleep, others who described daytime sleepiness, others who described any insomnia, you see again the fragility that the more disease burden, medical problems we carry, the greater the chance of complaint. So already we see from this it's going to be a complicated story. There's going to not be one, I'm sorry to say, one sort of magic bullet for our sleep problems as we get older. What I've done is I've collected them into 3 sort of bins. And among these age-related changes in sleep. So one is alteration in our nighttime sleep. And this would include it's shorter, it's fragmented, that is we're waking up, falling asleep, waking up, and there's also diminished slow wave or delta sleep. So when we look at this decreased duration and the fragmentation, here you'll remember these graphs are called hypnograms. So plotted here are the hours of sleep at night. So here we have 8 hours of sleep. Here's a young person. And then this is, the symbols here are when the person is in rapid eye movement sleep and these different stages of sleep, which we had described before. You might remember that stage 3, stage 4, it's otherwise called some other things. It's the deepest sleep based on the hardest to wake you up from. And is characterized by unusual brain activity in these very slow waves called delta waves. Anyway, in the young adult, here you see that deep sleep is accomplished in the first, say, third of the night. And then we see here these non-REM, REM cycles of about 90 minutes, progressing in a very sort of organized architecture. Here this person, here's wakefulness. So here this person woke up briefly here after this REM period and again here. Very briefly, who knows, turned over. Here's us. Not me yet, but us, where there are a couple of things we show. One is don't really generate this deep slow wave sleep, this delta sleep, which you might remember we had made the case that this seemed to be a measure of how much sleep you need. It seemed to be the thing that was being kept track of if you were missing it, so that you were getting enough of it. So we're not generating as much. I'll have another slide to show that in a little more detail, which you have there. So that's what we see here, barely getting any of that at all. And then in this case, lots of awakenings, lots of awakenings. Some of these, the person may not become conscious, but it's fragmenting the REM, non-REM cycles. For example, with sleep apnea, you may not come up to consciousness, but it interferes with the architecture of sleep. Or nocturia, being pain, other kinds of things that would break this up like that. Presumably, whatever the benefit of sleep, well, let me come back to that because I'll come back to it in a different way. So these are the alterations of nocturnal sleep, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with, or at least some of you. Shorter duration, this fragmentation, it's not consolidated. This you wouldn't be aware of, the decreased delta sleep, but it's happening. And what might cause that? Why would that? What would cause that? Well, one sort of idea that seems to make sense, you might remember this slide. This slide shows all the little nuclei in the brain, the areas of the brain that are responsible for being awake, and all the ones that are responsible for being asleep. And, you know, they're inhibiting each other. They're backing off each other. So again, when you fall asleep, we talked about falling asleep. When you fall asleep, not only do the wake areas have to withdraw, but the sleep areas have to turn on. So it has to be both. There's nothing passive. And so the idea, the concept is that in younger adults, this kind of balance between sleep and wake is really like a well-performing seesaw, that when one is active, it inactivates the other, that switches by mysterious method, and then inhibits. So it's this mutually inhibit, and it's very precise, like a baby. You can set them down, hopefully bang, they're out, or wake up. In older adults, there's some like instability of this, and presumably that's related to the fact, of course, that we're gradually losing cells in both of these areas. So as you know, the brain generally doesn't make new cells after we're born. It does actually, but in very restricted areas. And from the moment you know, we're growing up, we're losing brain cells, and most of them are not being replaced. And of course, we have many of them, so you can afford to lose them for a time. These are some of these areas, again, that the names are not so important for us, but these are some of these areas that are involved in this sleep-wake balance. And then these are the way these are measured are not critical for us tonight, but these are sort of measuring cellular densities in these different areas in young adults and in older adults. And you can see in all these areas that are critical for this tight seesaw to work, they're losing cells. So they're losing reserve. And presumably then there'll be some sloppiness in this transitions. So it's hard to get to sleep, it's hard to stay asleep, it's going up and down. Now, we have medicines, right, that are sedative hypnotics, but those are really like sledgehammers at the moment. They're not specific to the kind of brain areas that we want. So at the moment, I have no answer for us for this. Unhappily. This is this business, the other business, which is the loss of this slow wave sleep, which we had mentioned last time was really, and we'll get to it at the end again, was really key because it was this homeostatically controlled amount. That is, the amount of slow wave sleep that you generate is proportional to how long you've been awake. So the longer you're awake, the more slow wave sleep. The less. Something is keeping track, and so it's a measure of sleep need. It's also, if you look at it, it's a very strange way for the brain to behave, so something interesting is happening during that time. So here's what happens over age and years. Here's total sleep in minutes from, 0 or so, 10, 20, 30, 40. Here we're out here, out sort of off to the right, and these are the different stages, and you see here's delta, the amount, the total sleep in minutes, and it sort of dropped, so we have much less. There are two ways to interpret this, and it's a little unclear still. One possibility, which would be kind of the one you'd probably think of first, would be that the brain mechanisms for generating the delta sleep are degenerating, there's fewer of it, and we're not generating the amount that we should. And so we're delta sleep deprived, and maybe that's bad. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that this is actually physiological. That is, it's appropriate. Maybe whatever delta sleep was important for, making synapses, bringing in new memories at a rapid rate, We don't need it anymore. It's not really being used anymore. And so it's a perfect physiological possibility. People have looked at this with various experiments. It's not entirely clear, at least to me, but I can say that experiments show when experimenters do certain procedures that you'd expect young people would have this rebound in delta sleep, generate more, older people can too. So it's not like we can't actually generate it. So it may be a bit of both. But perhaps it's, we'll see. We don't know. It has those two possibilities. This is interesting. There's a sex difference on the impact of age on specifically that delta slow wave sleep. So here, in this graph, a traditional graph where the points are pink for women and blue for men. Here's the amount of slow wave sleep percentage. So this is an amount. This is age here. And you can see that the women are preserving the slow wave sleep pretty much more. It's dropping some, but much more than the men, where mine is catapulting it down. My wife is laughing. Thanks a lot. And sure enough, in these kind of studies, again, these are sort of functional imaging is the method, looking at an area called the medial prefrontal cortex, which is where a lot of intellect, decision-making, so forth, higher cortical function is believed to reside. And they look at just volume of that matter as well as its metabolism. And you can see across the board, the volume and the metabolic rate are higher in young than in old, but there's a difference between the old men and the old women here. So it's relatively preserved in the older women compared to men. And yet, women are more likely to suffer subjective complaints about poor sleep. I mean, there's a paper. So I don't understand it. That's curious. It's not more than elderly. Okay. Area 2. There's a weakened daily rhythm of sleep and wake. And you'll recall that the other topic we talked about last time was the influence of the internal clock, the circadian system, on time in sleep and wake. And we showed this kind of graph for a young adult, where this is not sleep and wake, but it's activity and not activity. So it's not exactly sleep and waking, but presumably when the person is active, shown here by these marks here, they're not sleeping. When they're not active, they may not be sleeping, but at least some of that would be sleep. And then days, consecutive days run from the top of the graph to the bottom. This is 48 hours, so 2 days worth. Here's the dark phase or night, and the young adult is quiet. Doesn't sleep very long, right? Here, looks like they go to bed. Well, yeah, hard to tell. But you can see there's a daily rhythm that's very regular and proceeding at 24 hours. If we look at an older adult, we'd see something like this, where it's no longer, sleep is no longer purely consolidated to the night, but it's sort of spilling out across. Some of these may be naps, some of them may be just, hanging your head down. And so instead of a sharp wake and sleep interval, it's mush right across. So sleep is interrupted and you're up, and wake is interrupted and you've lost this 24-hour rhythm. For animals, if this happened in the wild, it might really be life-threatening because predators are out at certain times of the day and you need to be safe. What's going on here? Well, here are a couple of ideas. There are two ideas, but they center on the fact that the circadian, this internal clock, is breaking down in some way. So one would be, is the clock, and you recall this nucleus, suprachiasmatic nucleus, this central master clock, is it degenerating along with all the other areas we've been talking about? And in fact, when people have done sort of pathological work with this, yes, in older people, this nucleus, which is not very big, it's about a millimeter in us, has maybe 20,000 cells, not that many. There's cell loss. So there's actually cell loss that might affect the function of this clock. These are mice. These are young mice, and from a Japanese group, a heroic experiments in which they're recording the rhythm of electrical activity in the nucleus in a behaving animal. So they have the electrode, and it's way deep in the brain. It's hard to find. So they have that electrode there, and then the animal is just tethered and can move around throughout sort of the cage, eat, sleep, and so forth. And in this young animal, this is the electrical rhythm of this clock, and you can see it's a beautiful. This is firing rate of the neurons, sort of of a number of neurons, and you see this beautiful 24-hour rhythm. It persists even in constant darkness, high amplitude, low noise, really pretty. This down here, these things, this is the animal running in the wheel. So he's running in, these are actually sheep, but they're running in the wheel when the nucleus is not firing, and they're quiet when it's high. These are older ones, and you can see what's happening here. It's really sloppy. So there's still a rhythm. You can sort of make it out here, but there's a lot of noise. And so there's not a good amplitude signal to the rest of the brain. And so, you may get very sloppy information from this that might account for the sloppy rhythms. So that's one possibility. Could we do anything about this? Well, people are working on trying to boost the amplitude of the molecular oscillations that are at the basis of this, because within individual cells, the basic oscillatory mechanism is molecular. But the hints on the effect of age is that molecular rhythm is probably okay. That's not the problem. The problem is this, in translating that to electrical activity. And it may be because some of the cells are lost, some of the connections between the cells are lost, so this becomes a harder problem to fix. Not obvious. The other possibility is, of course, this clock is synchronized or entrained by light in the morning, especially for us. And as we get older, we get cataracts. And all of the light information to this nucleus has to come through the eyes. It can't come through the skin or any other place. So it all comes through the eyes. Cataracts tend to be yellow. Blocks blue, especially blue light, which is the light that's especially sort of noted by this nucleus. So maybe the problem is that the nucleus is just not seeing the light as well. It's bothered by the halogen headlights on the two-lane road too. Sorry, I had to get that. And so people are looking into this. So far, things are kind of mixed, as you'd expect, because probably some people, the problem is going to be the SCN. Others, maybe the SCN's okay, but the SCN is just gasping for light. Here's one by a good, reliable group where they looked at self-assessed sleep quality by a kind of questionnaire, and it improved significantly it improved following cataract surgery in one eye, shown sort of here, 1 month and 12 months, those times. So that's something people are working on. And it sort of makes sense now that we know much more about how the circadian system works. So it may be that we could revive this or give it just a bit more information if it were getting enough light, the intensity of the light. And the same would be said by getting light during the day outdoors, which as we get older, often we don't. And so it seems more and more important as people are looking at that, just exposing yourself to light during the day, bright outside light. This is maybe 200 lux, this amount here. And on a cloudy day, it could be as much as 10,000 lux outside, even if it's cloudy. If it's sunny, like it always is in Austin, it could be 50,000, higher, 100,000. So that makes it work. People have looked at this. But it's likely to be complicated because there are going to be multiple factors. If it turns out that you're SCN, and I think my SCN there's nothing left of it. Because I don't get jet lag anymore. I can go anywhere I get no jet lag. I got no clock. Nothing. But you may have. You may still. So it won't help me. But there are multiple kinds of reasons here. But that's an interesting overview. And then third are, the earlier sleep and wake up times, right? So the duration of sleep, and it tends to fall asleep earlier, wake up earlier. And this gets to this concept that this fellow, scientist Till in Munich, is referred to as chronotype. That is, are you an early bird or a night owl, right? And this is, he's performed a lot of studies on this, and this was the distribution of early versus late types. You can see it's sort of a Gaussian curve. Early and late types. This is through an internet questionnaire. And this local time here represents the mid-sleep on weekends. So for example, if somebody went to bed at 1 in the morning, got up at 9:30, the mid-sleep would be 5:15. That would be right here. So that's what these represent. So these early people, these few, they're just like a little bunch of these, at 11 p.m., 2300. That's mid-sleep. That means they've gone to bed at, 7 p.m., right? The night owls here, where it's 11 in the morning, means that's their mid-sleep. That means they went to bed at 7 in the morning. So those are the extremes. So most are sort of in here, where the mid-sleep is around 4. So, and because of the type of people who answered this, most of them would be youngish kind of people. So this presumably is people sleeping from about midnight to 8, something like that. Okay? So early birds and night owls. And this is what happens to chronotype with age. So here is the chronotype, this mid-sleep phase. The early ones are down here, and the later ones are up here. And then this is age. And here are women, and here are men. And you can see that originally, the 10 years old people are pretty early. And then gradually, as they become teenagers, they get later and later, right? When their sleep delays later and later. That's why people are calling for sort of later school onset times. And then there's sort of a dramatic change here, which is around puberty. Not clear what's going on, but something around puberty. And then gradually, over time, we get earlier and earlier and earlier. Here it looks more dramatic than it really is. There's another graph, which I don't show you here, which shows the standard, the range, and it's very great. It's very great, a very great range. But on average, the women are earlier than the men. And then out where we are, we're all getting in bed at the same time. So we see that this sleep is getting early, we're becoming earlier and earlier. Why with age? Not clear. I showed this little cartoon last time to show, here's the consolidated wakefulness here. Magic occurs here, where we're plunged into sleep, like so. And this point is the result of this increase in sleep load. The longer you're awake, the sleepier you get. Those are the delta waves. And this is the circadian signal keeping us awake. So we can, without fancy modeling, we can imagine what might be happening here. So one possibility is the strength of this alerting signal is weaker, so it's not rising as high in the evening, and therefore we fall asleep earlier because we don't have this oppositional circadian piece. Or the other, of course, is the clock running faster with age. There's really no evidence for that, so that all of this is moved to the left and we would fall asleep. So changes in the relationship between the sleep load and the alerting signal, presumably in different amounts, might account for this change of chronotype coming earlier. There are probably things we can do about that. We can talk about it later, because if the supercosmic nucleus is still sort of on board, there are ways that we might be able to delay things. And we could mention those. So let me finish with some visions of the future, which are pretty wild. So among the functions, there are many functions of slow wave sleep. It's pretty clear. But as you may know, a key role is actually in consolidating salient memories. So over the course of the day, while we're awake, we experience a lot of episodes of things. There's a lot of input coming in. This is the short-term, so-called short-term memory, a temporary store in the structure of the hippocampus. And what the hippocampus is doing is it's selecting and encoding not all of these, but just some of these that are going to be processed further and will end up in the cortex as long-term storage. So there's a step here: selection, encoding, stabilization, enhancing, restructuring. All of these, slow wave sleep plays a prominent role, actually. And this, of course, is what you would want. How this goes, what's being encoded and what's not is not clear. Presumably things that are important to us, but how the brain decides this, I don't know. So I mean, I look out on you, and I see this gentleman with a beautiful shirt that's kind of nautical, and it's going into my hippocampus. Do I want to remember that for the rest of my life? On the other hand, I see my wife sitting there wearing a certain top. I should remember that. So somehow, all of those gauge to store. And sleep, it helps that. If you really want to know how the brain works, you should look at it sleeping, because then it's not just busy processing, food and incoming stuff. That's the brain working for itself. So they're strengthening neurologic things, metabolic things, but also cognitive. And so the question would come, you would ask, can we generate extra slow waves? Could we artificially induce slow waves and therefore improve our memories? That sounds pretty wild. Here's an experiment. This is 11 volunteers. They're young. This is a very good journal, by the way. And without going into the electronics, they're stimulated in a closed-loop system. That is, the system detects when a slow wave is produced naturally, and then gives, at a certain timing, at a critical timing, it gives a stimulation which kind of reverberates the slow wave, so you get more slow wave. So that's what's shown here. Here, these are seconds down here. So this is 1 second. So here's a slow wave coming out in black, and ordinarily the slow wave, there it is, and then there's none other. This one, the red is stimulated at this critical time point, critical phase, and you can see we get another 2 out of it. We get a couple more. And so they did this experiment sort of overnight, and before the sleep and before the experiment, they asked them to complete a memory kind of task. And then here, down here, is the retention the next morning of that task for those who had the stimulation versus those who had the sham. Significant increase in memory of the task overnight. This plot shows the relationship between the amount of slow waves generated, some more, some less, and how well the retention was. These are the open dots here, and you can see that the more slow waves generated in individuals' nights, the greater the retention. There was a relationship between those. The control for this experiment is to do everything the same, except when the slow wave comes, they give the stimulation at the wrong time, not at the right time. And so you don't, here you can see, there's the control, the black, and here they give it at this other time, not shown here what the time is. And they get a little blurb, but nothing really much. And they don't get any from that. So that's the control, where the person has spent the night wearing all his gear, you're in stimulate, and so forth. So, interesting. There is an association of the amount of slow wave sleep and cognition in us. So here's an experiment of 135 cognitively intact older adults, mean age of about 70. And they're given a memory task. And then measured is their slow wave sleep. They're just measuring how much they get. And you can see here are all the dots all over the place. So there's a lot of variation. But statistically speaking, there is a relationship that those who are generating more slow wave sleep have better episodic memory. Now this is just an association, right? So one possibility could be they generate more slow wave sleep, and so that's good for their memory. The other is they've got certain genetics that they have good sleep and they have good memory, and neither are related to each other, they're related to something else. So it's an association. But here's the last slide. And this is early stuff. 9 people with mild cognitive impairment. Based on the evaluation, they have some risk of conversion ultimately to Alzheimer's disease later. And they get this business. They get this. So one night of stimulation, one night of sham, design, everybody gets everything. And the acoustic stimulation increased slow wave activity by about 10%. So again, I go back to what I said before, this diminution of delta slow wave activity, we can boost it. It's boostable. It's not sort of lost. Who knows how much we can boost it. Anyway, that's the experiment. And here's individually how the individuals did. So these are 9. So, and this is the recall. You can see there's wide variation, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them did better. And this is compared to the sham. 2 of them did worse. 2 of them didn't do anything. So this is a starting experiment. But look at this, percent change of the slow wave activity. Here's the percent change. And again, there's a statistically significant effect that there's increased recall, here you can see, in relationship to more slow wave activity. So, interesting start. So that's a vision of the future of where we may go. So ultimately, for young people, I tell them probably during their lives, they'll go to sleep at night and wear some contraption that'll counter slow waves. So we'll see, the relationship between the intensity of their sleep and the duration and get a true sense of whether they're getting enough sleep. And maybe for us, I don't know, we'll be wearing something that'll buzzing us. And in the morning, we'll recite the Encyclopedia Britannica. But that won't exist anymore. Anyway, okay, so that's sort of the science of sleep and aging. Multiple things going on, so not going to be a magic bullet. But both in terms of strengthening the circadian clock, maybe possibilities for that, maybe some artificial way to generate slow waves, and of course the problem is you may generate the slow waves, but maybe all the machinery that the slow waves are activating, maybe that machinery with aging is not working so well. So okay, so we'll hold our investments, but people are working on this. Thanks again for the second invitation. We have time. I presume we have plenty of time for questions on anything.
Are there any effective medicinal sleep aids?
Well, yes, and it depends a little bit on sort of the issue. So, as you know, most of the classic sedative hypnotics, which work through the GABA receptor, the problem with them is they lose their potency. And they have a lot of side effects, sedation, other sorts of things. So that's really a sledgehammer type thing. There are certain sleep disorders that do respond to melatonin, but it's not all insomnias. We haven't really talked about them here. One of them is a melatonin or a melatonin agonist. One of them are people who are very late chronotype. They may respond, that may move them earlier if you give the melatonin at the right time, which is not right before bed. That's what's confusing. Although I think for many of those people, even though that works, they don't like it. So our daughter is a very late type. Right? She's up at 3 a.m. was doing musical composition, best work. And of course here, her father is a circadian biologist. She can't get late for school. So I cured her, by administering light at the right time and so forth. And yeah, she got up earlier, and then she said, I don't like it, right? So I don't have my edge. And a lot of the people who have that say that. So the late type is more than just you sleep at late. The other is a supposedly unusual disorder, but I bet it's more common than we think. which you may have heard of, which has been called non-24-hour disorder, sleep-wake disorder. And that's basically sort of where the supracosmic nucleus, the clock, is not entrained to 24 hours, and it's just free running. And that's an interesting problem. And those probably do respond to melatonin agonists. But as a general, for melatonin as a general, for all sorts of insomnia, it's not that. It's good for jet lag. Otherwise, it's sort of if we get into some of the sort of neurochemistry, there are some newer ones that revolve around peptides that are called orexin, which are important in narcolepsy. And so some of those which activate that or inhibit it may be used. So some of those. So that's sort of where we are, I think, for medicinal ones.
Okay. There are a couple of states that do not use daylight savings time. And I'm wondering if the way light could affect this, if studies have been done in daylight saving time states and non-daylight savings, if there anything that would show up related to this topic.
Yeah, so ordinarily, the clock, the circadian clock, doesn't run, left to its own devices, it doesn't run exactly 24 hours. It needs light, as you know, at certain times. And for us, without getting into the chronobiology, the most important light for resetting the clock is in the morning. You've probably heard that too. So that's sort of key, that morning light. The problem with daylight savings time, as we see, is we're up now in the morning and it's dark. And it's light down later. But that's from a circadian point of view. From a business point of view, I understand it's easier to go to Central Market when it's light out. But from a circadian point of view, you need that morning sort of light. And so that's why sleep docs and circadian people have been opposed to daylight savings. The other problem, especially in our time zone, which is very wide, central time zone. So for example, probably around now, if you're at the most eastern part of our time zone, so Alabama, the sun is coming up around 7 or 7:15. If you're at the other sort of end, or even because it's sort of higher up to the western end, it's coming up a couple hours. It's coming up at 8:30. So we think our kids are sort of in the dark. Yeah. So that's the main reason why, from a scientific, not from other points of view, but from a scientific point of view, we'd rather just stay on the standard time. I mean, you're not losing or gaining anything, right? You're just rearranging it.
We may have to vote on it, too.
Yeah. And as you say, some don't, some don't.
Does red light therapy affect your ability to sleep?
Generally speaking, I mean, in terms of the spectrum, in terms of the retinal cells and the opsins that the clock is paying attention to, as you probably know, because we hear it all over TikTok, it's especially sensitive in the blue. The red is sort of the opposite way, and it's generally less sensitive to that, generally. So for example, when we were in the laboratory, when we were doing experimental work in the dark, we'd have red lights, and it didn't interfere with things in the animals, generally. If you have enough, but it's true, it's the blue it's the one that's, and that's why the yellow cataracts are a problem.
Does the sleeping pills increase the slow wave? Right here.
Yes, sir.
does the sleeping pills actually increase the slow wave?
I'd have to see for sort of all of them. Most of the issue with the sleeping pills is many of them inhibit REM sleep, and nothing bad happens to people, right? Yeah. So the issue about slow waves, it's going to vary between them. I don't think it would increase it in the way that we sort of see here. So, and again, the issue is, although the sleep docs talk about the slow waves, obviously what's happening with the memory enhancement is the slow waves are permissive or setting up the brain cells in such a way that they can do their work. But if they're damaged, then it's not going to help just the waves per se. Right? So.
Could you go into more detail about the effect of blue light on sleep? Specifically, how much time before going to bed should you get off screen?
Yeah. So the idea is that there was recently, it was about 20 years ago or so, it was discovered that in the retina, certain cells that were thought not to actually process light did, and they were synthesizing an opsin called melanopsin, which is a very primitive opsin, which is sensitive to blue. I think it's probably a complicated thing. I mean, I think one of the things that we probably don't get enough of, and there's a complicated history for why this is probably so, is bright light during the day, which I think turns out to be important in helping us set the clock. So I'm not sure I could give sort of a precise how much blue light or intensity, something like that. I mean, in general, as a general kind of rule, one would do less of that kind of screen time for a couple of hours. Yeah, I can't. I mean, not sure I could give sort of a precise thing, and obviously it would vary. But I expect that in combination with bright sunlight during the day, maybe even more blue light, it even wouldn't have such a bad effect, because that bright light is helping to synchronize the clock too. If the light during the day is very dim, if we're in dim light during the day, and add to that the blue light the screen, that's probably the situation where we have some sort of biggest effects.
So if for some reason you need to expose yourself to blue light closer to bedtime, are there certain colored lenses that would offset that to a certain extent?
There are a lot of things out there on Amazon and others. So there are a lot of products that blocking glasses. The last I sort of was reading about this is most of them don't do what they say they're supposed to do.
Shocking.
Here I thought, if they said,
Yeah.
so I don't know if I can't tell you a particular, I bet there may be a particular one, maybe, but I don't know. But at least most of them don't block it in a way that would be.
Yeah, for an activity that we're in at the moment, I'm sorry, did I jump?
No, I see her, so we're going to stay.
For an activity like we're in at the moment, and a person is used to going to bed at between 10 and 11, let's say, would this be an interruption at all, or would exercise or reading before going to bed, would that affect it?
Well, Yeah, all of those, but the thing about exercise and reading. So the only things I would say about that, so this is evening, and maybe you're going to be, say we would go to bed at 10 or something like that. It's 2 hours before, so we're getting some evening light, which we want to keep to a minimum. It's not that bright, but the clock can see it. The clock's pretty sensitive. Exercise is helpful, but not too close to going to bed, right? Because then you raise your body temperature, and that's sort of a problem. So at least a couple of hours, several hours before going to bed. As far as reading goes, I would say it has been shown, for example, between an e-reader with the light versus a book. The book is better, much less blue than a Kindle or one of those. So reading is good if it were a book with just reflected light. Presumably if you read something exciting or scary or erotic, maybe that's no good for some. So I guess it depends on what you read too. For some people, they fall asleep as they're reading, so it must be good. Yeah, so those would be some general,
What are some examples of acoustic stimulation that help with sleep?
Some examples.
You were talking about how these experiments were done with acoustic stimulation.
It was a kind of a click deliver. It's a research tool. It was a type of click that was synchronized to a particular part of the slow wave. So it's not something we would do, in bed.
We could do.
Yeah, not at the moment. Yeah, right. Right. So it's just an experimental, and the key of it was, it's what's called a closed loop system. So it has to deliver this at a certain timing with respect to the slow wave. Otherwise, it won't reverberate like that. Yeah. So that's what those were. But the basic concept is sort of there.
For me, that kind of brings up the idea of what about white noise or ocean sounds or things like that as you're in the sleep?
Well, again, sort of there's so many different causes for insomnia, and as we see, when we saw the first slide where the complaints of insomnia sort of skyrocketed with the number of medical problems, we can sort of see that even if we make some inroads on it, we may still have some left over because there are just so many multiple things because sleep is so fragile. So one of the things, of course, that people talk about is, and when you talk about, we did it the last time with the sleep hygiene, is you're asked to clear away all worries and ruminations. Thank you very much. That's what I have to do. That's what you have to do. Until you do that, I don't want to talk to you. So in the sense that the ocean, which I like, might put you in a certain state of calmness, that would help. Yeah. So it's all of these little sort of bits. It isn't, the insomnia, most of these insomnias is not, most of them are not sort of a single cause, bang. Right, so that's the issue, because sleep is so fragile that all of these, they're combinatorial. So you sort of chip away at all of them. One of them is the blue light, one of them is the exercise. All of these different sort of pieces to get some significant help. But some of it may be just the old age of our neural systems.
Well, thank you so much. That's been a wonderful, very interesting evening. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you.
Please be sure to fill out your evaluations and leave them at the back as you exit.